want the documents.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's really interesting to be here debating this privilege motion that first came to the House in September 26. So nearly 2 months ago, we first started having this conversation when the Speaker ruled on a point of privilege that found that the privileges of the House had in fact been breached. And there was a point in time many years ago when I was studying political science as a very keen young student where the fact of breaches of privilege were exceptionally rare. And I remember going through the books and studying it, and when I was a brand new member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, reading through the various rulings of different speakers through the years, and this was something that was very uncommon, and yet it seems like after 9 years of this NDP-Liberal government, there is a new privilege being breached just about every week. There is a new scandal, it seems, every day, and we're not talking about small scandals. And so this is one of the challenges that Conservatives have, is that we're not talking about a small amount of money. We're talking about nearly $400 million that was misspent, that the Auditor General found was misspent by this NDP-Liberal government that went to Liberal insiders. In fact, based on what the Auditor General was able to find, this Green Slush Fund gave $58 million to 10 projects that were ineligible and couldn't actually demonstrate an environmental benefit or development of green technology. $58 million, 10 projects, not a one-off. That's a pretty large amount, okay?
Nothing to see here.
But yeah, according to the Liberals, nothing to see here. Then there was $334 million and 186 cases to projects in which the board members themselves held conflicts of interest. So the people that were deciding where the money got spent decided to give $334 million to themselves and their friends. But worse than that, there were some projects that were both ineligible and in conflict. Like, that's a special kind of failure to be able to do both at once. But after 9 years of this NDP Liberals, it seems like that's business as usual. Canadians are struggling. We have 1 in 4 parents that are themselves skipping meals, going without food to make sure that their children have food. We have 1 in 5 children here in this country that are now living in poverty. We have the highest increase in child poverty that we've seen, year-over-year increases after 9 years of these guys being in charge. And Canadians are sitting there wondering, when is the end in sight? And the interesting piece is we have been sitting here for nearly 2 months debating that this government is so afraid of what will be found that they refuse to give documents to the RCMP. We're not saying we need to tell the RCMP what to do with the documents. All that was decided was that government documents need to go to the RCMP, and if the RCMP finds something wrong, the RCMP can then do something. They are so afraid of the RCMP seeing these documents that they have stonewalled Parliament, ground this place to a virtual halt, prevented important pieces of legislation from going forward, all at the sake of protecting Liberal insiders. Let that sink in. They would rather have us chat and have conversations and debates day in, day out for over almost 2 months on whether the privilege has been breached or not, which we know it has been breached because you, Madam Speaker, the Speaker has in fact ruled that there was a breach that was put in place. And yet they are so afraid of the RCMP seeing these documents that they continue to filibuster this bill. In fact, the last time I got up to speak on this, I had the statistics of the number of words that had been made by the parliamentary secretary from Winnipeg. And he can't help himself. It seems like at every opportunity, he gives another 20-minute speech and another 10 minutes of Q's and A's. On top of that, at every opportunity when there's a speaker, he makes sure that he is the very first person up to ask questions. And in fact, I would be surprised if he hadn't asked questions to every single speech that has been asked, and there might be a few that he hasn't. But this just goes to show the length that this government is willing to do to protect these Liberal insiders. Canadians deserve to have this information. And the challenge with this green slush fund is that it seems like every few weeks we find a new layer to this onion of scandal. Like, we found cases where companies like Cycle Capital that just happened to have the Minister of Environment who happened to have worked for that company before, they got money. I'm sure that's total coincidence, and that is totally A-okay, even though the Minister of Environment still has shares in that very company. I think that should be probably a bit of a red flag. We've also spent the last month learning a variety of different scandals of this Parliament, and in fact, should this government finally decide enough's enough, we will release the documents so that we can move on to the important business of Parliament. Then we have the next privilege debate that we will be having on the business partner of the member from Edmonton Centre, Stephen Anderson, and have a conversation about that privilege and the lack of answers that he provided when he came to committee. And so this is part of a troubling pattern here. The fact that we had someone come to the bar of the House of Commons in this session should be a pretty alarming space. But at this point, under these NDP Liberals in the last 9 years, this is what we see. And they keep making these arguments of like, oh, we can't direct the RCMP. No one's directing the RCMP. In fact, it's really interesting. There was a company in my riding, a corporation, and they found that there was fraud or suspected fraud at their place of business. And so they assembled all the documents that would help the RCMP in conducting their investigation, and they assembled it all, and they provided it to the RCMP so the RCMP could do their job and determine whether there was or wasn't fraud. That is precisely what Conservatives are asking to have happen. We're simply asking for the government to not redact information because, frankly, if we can't trust the RCMP, then who can we trust? If they're so concerned about privacy and the RCMP having this information, there is a whole other series of questions that should be asked. But the reality of this, Madam Speaker, is that we are asking for the government to do its job. We've been able to identify through a variety of different pieces, including the Auditor General, who is a trustworthy source. It's not some random person that is anonymous, that there was over 400 million that was found that was ineligible or that was in conflict. And that's a large amount of money. That is more money than most Canadians could imagine. And this is part of the issue, is that they continue to sit here and say, we don't believe that this should happen, and they'll cite the same person over and over again, giving all these reasons why they don't think that we should release this documentation to the RCMP. But here's the difference between what they're trying to say and what the reality is the government of Canada is effectively the employer here. And so it is government money, it is taxpayer money, and we owe it to taxpayers to make sure we're getting to the bottom of this. And so if things weren't right, we need to investigate this. We need to have the RCMP, that is the organization that has been tasked with getting to the bottom of fraud and a variety of other crimes. We trust them to deal with a variety of things and keep law and order in our country. And after 9 years of this NDP Liberal, we see rampant crime. We see rampant chaos on our streets. We saw Montreal devolve into a space that was hard to even understand this weekend. Like, literally, there were people protesting on the streets of Montreal in anti-Semitic ways, and it took until the next afternoon for the Prime Minister to even say and condemn those actions, which is, in my opinion, very reprehensible. But he was busy. He had pre-existing commitments. But most people can do two things at once. I know I can chew gum and walk at the same time. And so when I have family commitments or different kinds of commitments and something pressing comes up, my phone is never very far away, and I am capable of approving a statement or putting out a statement in effectively real time or as close to real time as possible, the exception being if I'm on an airplane. But we know that the Prime Minister wasn't on an airplane and didn't have a lack of access to internet. So the delay is a questionable delay at best. But this is part of the track record. They have become so accustomed to scandals that it doesn't even seem like they're concerned about this. And this is one of the things, and I'm sure that the Liberal members will give all these answers as to the fact that they are so concerned about these scandals. But I'm just going to give a little bit of a reminder here. We had the Prime Minister's Cash for Access scandal of him inviting wealthy people to come and breaking all these ethics rules. We then had the Prime Minister go to the Aga Khan's island, taking a gift of the charter flight that is against the rules and breaking the very first Prime Minister in Canadian history to actually break the ethics rules. That was this Prime Minister. And so, you know what, they're kind of okay with breaking the rules and skirting around things. Then there was all of the challenges of his trip to India in 2018 and some of the cultural appropriation, just to kind of be fairly vague in that piece, because I think many Canadians saw the pictures and had some serious concerns as to whether this was actually a serious Prime Minister or not. And that was where I know a lot of my constituents, and I was an MLA at the time, were starting to question and actually have very serious concerns, like, is this guy serious? And it very quickly, as things have gone through, realized that no, if he is serious, that's even scarier. Then we saw the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which was the second ethics violation, where the Prime Minister politically interfered with the Attorney General, a strong Indigenous woman, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and effectively fired her, trying to just protect SNC-Lavalin and save jobs in Quebec. And the company was charged with fraud and corruption and basically sending $48 million to the Libyan government between 2001 and 2011. And while eventually the end of that was that Wilson-Raybould, a strong Indigenous woman, was thrown out of caucus and is no longer a member of Parliament. But they're okay with that because they had to protect the Prime Minister. Then there was a series of different illegal election donations to the Liberals over many different years. And then the We Charity scandal. That's where I think a lot of Canadians really started to go, okay, enough is enough. Like, you've got to be joking me. Where the Prime Minister chose We Charity, which he had family ties to, his mother, his brother, and his now ex-wife, who does a variety of paid speaking roles for this charity. They gave them a $912 million contract. So the Prime Minister's mom earned a total of $250,000 for speaking at 28 events. His brother was paid $32,000 for 8 events. And his ex-wife also made a variety of appearances. And the Prime Minister didn't step aside from the cabinet table on the discussions around this. And here's the crazy part is effectively, after all the scrutiny, the government changed directions and We Charity was no longer responsible for the contract. But this was after spending a large amount of Canadians' dollars on a scheme without proper oversight. But then, because like those scandals aren't enough, then we get into the Arrive scam, where government paid GC Strategies 118 contracts worth over $107 million to a 2-person company. 2 persons. And we've had a variety of different organizations and people say that this was an app that probably could have been designed in a weekend for about $80,000, but it was the government. So, of course, why wouldn't we just waste money under this NDP-Liberal government? And in fact, Kristen Firth of GC Strategies was called to the bar of the House of Commons for refusing to answer questions at committee. This is the first time that it happened since 1913. It was kind of cool to be in a historic space and see that process go through from like a very academic space, but for the sake of transparency and access to Canadians, it is exceptionally troubling that we are at a space where these kinds of things keep happening, and the Prime Minister's answer is that it's someone else's fault, or we've experienced it differently, or we've all learned a lesson. It can't ever be his fault, because he refuses to take accountability for any action. In fact, with the member from Edmonton Centre, it took weeks of scandal after scandal being uncovered before, and he wasn't fired. He stepped outside. There was a mutual decision between the Prime Minister and him. In fact, the day before this mutual decision was made, the Prime Minister was defending him outside of this country. And this is part of the problem, is there is no ministerial accountability anymore after 9 years of this NDP-Liberal. There is no accountability for the Prime Minister after 9 years of these NDP-Liberals. There is no accountability from the government. In fact, they act like it is their money to spend, and Canadians should be grateful that they're giving them small amounts of their money back, and they're bribing them with a variety of different pieces, including this newest piece in the sprinkling Canadians' money back to themselves, this weird 2-month pause on GST for a small amount of things, but it doesn't count to everything, and this is part of the challenge. And so, chocolates. Well, if you go to a company like Loblaws and you get a chocolate basket during that 2-month period of time, that will be GST exempt. But if you went to a chocolate boutique that specialized in chocolates and bought a chocolate basket, that probably won't be GST exempt from the information that we've had in a space where the CIB has already come out, and the CFIB, so the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, has already said this is problematic. And having grown up in a small business family, I know the number of small business owners I've talked to that, like, their point of service systems don't just allow for quick changes. Yeah, many people are now digital, and so this might not be a bureaucratic nightmare for all businesses, but for small businesses that don't have an electronic point of service system, this will be very difficult, and this will put a lot of work back on them. But this is how this NDP-Liberals do. They don't actually want to solve the problem. The solution would be quite simply to axe the carbon tax on everything for everyone for good.
Sure.
That would lower the price of groceries, that would lower the price of home heating, that would lower the price of fuel, that would lower the price of food, that would lower the price of just about everything. But no. They would rather their tax scheme of a carbon tax that has all economic pain and no environmental gain to continue hurting Canadians and then sprinkle little pieces of money back at them. Like, they're doing a GST exemption on Christmas trees, but their GST exemption is only going to start on December 14th. Most people already have their Christmas tree purchased by December 14th, so I'm not quite sure who this is going to help. I'm sure there will be a few, but what I'm really nervous about, and here's where the answers and the devil is in the details on this, Madam Speaker, is that we don't actually know all the details on this. So will this end up meaning that a whole bunch of Canadians will delay all of their Christmas shopping and their holiday shopping till after, once this GST vacation is in place, therefore making it really difficult for businesses who are already struggling because of out-of-control spending from this government, the crippling carbon tax that makes keeping the lights on more difficult for small businesses? Will they have a harder time and end up having their sales in a shorter window of time, making the customer experience more difficult and their overall enjoyment more difficult? And these are the realities. After 9 years of this NDP-Liberals, they've lost the plot. They've lost the ability to realize that the decisions they make and the fact that they are going to continue to block good documents from going to the RCMP unredacted is going to hurt Canadians. And eventually this information is going to come out. The question is just, are they going to wait until after the next election, or will they do the right thing, get Parliament back to work, and release the documents unredacted?
Well done. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And the member wanted to focus attention on the issue of scandals. And the leader of the Conservative Party directly and indirectly when he was a part of the Stephen Harper government. Let me give a bit of a list. Anti-terrorism scandal, $3.1 billion. Phoenix scandal, $2.2 billion. G8 spending scandal, the ETS, $400 million scandal. F-35 scandal. Senate scandal. Election scandals, plural. He's directly involved in one of those too, by the way, Madam Speaker. And then I got another, Stephen Harper, serial abuser of power, scandals, corruption, abuse of power, Madam Speaker. It's a hefty book, 70 different scandals in that one. Now, the question that I have for the member opposite is that who would she recommend to her constituents that they listen to? The RCMP, the Auditor General, or the politically motivated, self-serving leader of the Conservative Party on the issue of giving the documents directly to the RCMP? Do we ignore what the RCMP are saying? Do we know what ignore what the Auditor General are saying? Do we ignore what law experts are saying? All because she wants to follow her leader.
For Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I first actually started really paying attention to politics, it was actually a really interesting time. It was right around the Liberal sponsorship scandal, where there was actually cash being put into envelopes from Liberal coffers. And they were like literally stuffing envelopes with this. There was so much money, and like this was cash. And so that actually brought down Paul Martin's government. So if he's going to really go into scandals, he really has to be careful, because at least Paul Martin did the right thing. And eventually the NDP actually supported the Conservatives in bringing down that government, because they realized that their job was to keep accountability for Canadians. This costly coalition of the NDP-Liberals, they've literally sprinkled a little bit of GST vacation for a couple months on a few products just to buy back the support of this failed marriage of the NDP-Liberals.
Not going to work.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Toronto St. Paul's.
Speaker, I wanted to thank the members today that have highlighted the activities in Montreal over the weekend, the riots, and draw attention for a moment to the different symbols that we saw there. We saw the hammer and sickle, we saw Daesh flags, and we saw watermelon buttons as well. The question to my colleague is, as I'm new in this House, and I'm often reminded of that by the members opposite, who must feel threatened in some way by me to try and take down the most rookie MP on this side. But my question is, because I'm new, could you comment on whether the deflection from the government is something that you've seen a lot over the time, or is that something new?
Reminder to the Honourable Member, I can't comment on anything, but the Honourable Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake, I'm sure will.
You don't want to.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There might be a difference between whether you want to share your opinion and whether you are able to share your opinion. But to my colleague from Toronto St. Paul's, it is so spectacular to have a Conservative in that seat within the GTA representing those views. And I have been so fortunate in the couple months that we have been able to work together to learn from you and to learn some of the unique challenges that people in Toronto are facing that we hadn't heard, because no one on the Liberal benches brings those concerns forward because it's not politically salient to them. And he raises some very serious concerns regarding the Jewish community and the sense of safety and the lack of safety. It's not just the sense. People don't feel safe, but they no longer are safe. And so I want to thank him for his amazing advocacy for the people of Toronto St. Paul's, and I look forward to adding more members from GTA with his help in the next election, whenever that happens to be.
That's right.
Well, Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You can appreciate, in listening to the member opposite, you get this sense that she might be a little bit nervous in regards to the tax break that the government is providing Canadians through the GST. It's almost as if the Conservatives are a little scared. They don't want to vote against it, yet they're being obligated, possibly by their leader, to be voting against it. I'm wondering if she could give us a clear indication. What is the Conservative Party on this particular issue? Will she, as an individual member of Parliament, or does she believe the Conservatives will be voting against the tax break that the government's providing to Canadians for 2 months?
Honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This weekend, I went home, as I often do. I actually go home every weekend, and when I travel, on Friday mornings, I leave Ottawa at like 5 in the morning. So it's a pretty early flight, so I often am wearing a hoodie, and I'm rather incognito. People don't often realize that I'm the member of Parliament when I get on. It is very cold when I land, but the hoodie is more that it helps me sleep on the one flight. And so when I got on my final flight, the flight from Calgary to Fort McMurray, there was a group of people, and they didn't know that I was a member of Parliament, and they were actually talking about the so-called tax breaks, this like vacation on GST on a small amount of items. And they were talking about how they were so frustrated that the government, that the NDP-Liberals think that they can buy their votes by giving a small amount of their money back just in time for Christmas. And it was really interesting. This one particular woman, she actually said very clearly, and I went over and afterwards I said, actually, I'm the member of Parliament. It's great to meet you. But she said, you know what, if they really wanted to make a difference, they would axe the carbon tax.
Right.
That has a bigger impact on my life.
Or give a friendship bracelet.
And so these are one of these pieces that we're not going to take any lessons from that member or them on what they think affordability is for Canadians, because Canadians in my riding and Canadians from coast to coast to coast, they see the impact of the carbon tax on their heating bill. They see the impact of the carbon tax every time they fill up their vehicle with gasoline. They see the impact of the carbon tax every time they get their gas bill. So I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, giving a small amount of money sprinkled in a very abstract, obscure way for 2 months is not going to actually provide the help Canadians need that are struggling to put food on their table. Like I said, 1 in 5 children is living in poverty in Canada, and that is due to this NDP-Liberal mismanagement of the economy.
She's got a bracelet for you.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Calgary-Bindapore.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In her last response, the member mentioned children. And I know, like myself, the member is a mother and has 2 beautiful young children. We were talking earlier this week when the announcement was made about the different expenses that she has as a mother. And so I thought perhaps she could make some comments on this new announcement relative to being a mother, and as to really the little impact that it will have on her day-to-day necessities as a mother of 2 children. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for that question. And and this is one of the interesting pieces. So maybe in some parts of the country, you can wait till December 14th to buy your children winter boots or a winter jacket, but that's not the case in most parts of rural Canada. In fact, I just pulled up the weather app. It's -13 in Fort McMurray. We've got a full snow cover. So I can't wait to save 5% on a snowsuit and wait another month before my children would have appropriate winter gear. Parents can't afford to do that because they would be putting their children at danger. And so this is part of the struggle. Like I said earlier, if this government really cared about helping Canadians that are struggling with this cost of living crisis that they caused, there's a very simple answer. They could axe the carbon tax on everything for everyone for always. That would actually have an impact and allow parents to choose how they are going to support their families, because the reality is 5% savings for a family in Alberta on diapers will I did some calculations. I spend about $100 a month on diapers. That means a $5 savings. If I shop the diapers while they're on sale, which is probably not going to fall when this GST holiday actually falls, I can save $11 by shopping the sales. So I'm better off to just wait for a sale on diaper if I can afford to stock up. But most families can't afford to stock up right now. Most families can't afford to do those things because they have made it so difficult because of their ever-increasing tax burden. So, Madam Speaker, there's good news and hope on the horizon. Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax for everyone on all the items for always when it comes to the carbon tax.
Can't come soon enough.